Greetings, it's Allie, and I'm back with another episode of Tarot for Geeks, where I pull the same card from each of my pop culture decks and see if I can find any patterns or themes that will provide a deeper meaning for that particular card. In case you've been wondering why I've been doing these episodes out of order, the answer to that is that in order to challenge myself, I randomly have drawn a card from a deck until I pull out a major arcana card. Whatever card I pull is the one that I study next. Today I will be talking about the High Priestess, as you can see, where I will share my thoughts and insights that I found meaningful, as well as mention a few other characters not in any of my decks that I also think represent the archetype of the High Priestess. As usual, I invite you to share your own thoughts and observations or any characters from your favorite stories, movies, TV, or games that you feel most represent the High Priestess in the comments below. Okay, so let's first take a look at a traditional High Priestess card from a Rider-Waite deck. So right away we see that there's a female figure in the center, dressed modestly in robes, with a cross in the center that suggests that these are religious garments, so she must be a spiritual person. She is seated between two pillars, the black pillar of strength or severity, called Boaz, and the white pillar of mercy or stability, which is Jachin. Boaz and Jachin were two enormous pillars that flanked the entrance to Solomon's temple, as described in the Bible. In the tarot, they symbolize duality, light and darkness, male and female, passivity and action, etc., much like the yin-yang symbol. The cross on her chest is another duality symbol, which represents the intersection of the spiritual and physical worlds. Behind her is a tapestry of palm trees and pomegranates. The palm trees are a symbol of divine masculinity and celibacy, just think Palm Sunday, and the pomegranates represent the divine feminine and fertility. There is a lot of duality in this card, so it's no coincidence that the High Priestess is card number 2 in the Major Arcana, and the number 2 is the number of duality, choice, and unity. In her hands, she holds the scroll of the Torah to symbolize sacred law and knowledge. Notice that the scroll is partially hidden behind her robes to denote that some things are implied and not everything needs to be said or seen. She has a crescent moon at her feet, and the hat on her head to me also resembles the phases of the moon. The moon is another symbol of divine femininity, as well as unconscious thought and mystery. So what do we know about the High Priestess already, and what are some key themes to look for in our character archetypes? So she is female with a connection to spirit or the collective unconscious, and she acts as a gatekeeper. She represents mystery, privacy, secrecy, psychic powers, intuition, divine feminine, non-activity, passivity, patience, wisdom, knowledge, and is receptive or open to information. So let's look at a few characters in the decks that I have laid out here to illustrate what other possible High Priestesses are out there in our favorite stories. Okay, I'm going to take her away. Okay, so let's start with Melisandre. Now, the Red Woman gets a lot of criticism from tarot readers and deck collectors for being cast as the High Priestess in the Game of Thrones tarot deck. I think personally that this is because a lot of tarot readers see the High Priestess as an ideal role model for them and aspire to be just like her, and Melisandre is not exactly the ideal role model type. She is, however, a priestess who is strongly connected and devoted to her god and her faith. She has supernatural abilities, which are bizarre and mysterious. She possesses or has access to sacred knowledge, such as the prophecy of Azor Ahai. She can read messages in the fire, which is how she communicates with her deity, but as I said, she is far from perfect. Her misinterpretations of divine messages has led to the deaths of many innocents despite her flaws. I think she does reflect the archetype of the High Priestess. No card in the tarot is all good or all bad. Every card has dark and light qualities, and Melisandre does show the shadow side of the High Priestess. She has led others astray and has disconnected herself from emotion. For example, she felt no remorse for her actions, believing that the ends justified the means, until she saw proof that her initial convictions were wrong. She receives visions and insights, but when she does, she deludes herself into believing that they mean what she wants them to mean. So she allows her ego to interfere with her intuition. Now, over here, we have Minerva McGonagall from the Harry Potter Tarot. When I first saw McGonagall as a High Priestess card, I had to kind of take pause and ask myself if that was the right choice for this card. She is a high-ranking professor at Hogwarts. She's the deputy head mistress and second in command to Albus Dumbledore, who is featured on the Hierophant card. So in that sense, it seems to work. Since there isn't any really religious or spiritual organizations in the wizarding world, I had to think if there was anyone better than McGonagall for the High Priestess. The only other character that came to my mind was Sybil Trelawney. Professor Trelawney taught divination. She had the sight and the ability to see into the future. That was a gift that she inherited from her great-grandmother Cassandra. Divination seems to be a subject that is looked down on by most other wizards. They claim that the predictions are not accurate or very useful. So it's kind of a silly subject to be devoting a lot of time to. Dumbledore himself was going to cancel the class, but hired Trelawney at the very last minute in order to keep her safe from Voldemort, because it was her that provided the Harry Potter Voldemort prophecy, which ultimately put her in danger. So Trelawney, I'm not sure if she's the perfect choice either. She's a bit awkward. She is eccentric. She mostly keeps to herself. She doesn't really eat or socialize with the other faculty. She's viewed a bit as a bumbling fool and a fraud. However, if you do pay close attention to the story, almost all of her predictions end up coming true, just not in the way that we think they will. So Trelawney does have the psychic qualities of the High Priestess. She is a bit eccentric and mysterious. She's receptive to information, and she's also very private and withdrawn as well. McGonagall, on the other hand, also has a few High Priestess qualities. I don't think she's a terrible choice. She does tend to work a lot behind the scenes, where she uses her power and influence. She is part of the Order of the Phoenix, a secret organization formed to combat Voldemort and his Death Eaters. She is a bit of a stickler for the rules. However, she does know when to break them. She was the one that convinced Oliver Wood to put Harry on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and she gave Hermione the time turner so that she could attend all of those extra classes. Her animagus is a cat, an animal with feminine and lunar qualities, like curiosity, mysterious, magical. They're cunning, independent, patient, and nocturnal as well. Which segues great into this character here from the DC comic books. This is from the DC Justice League Tarot, and we have Catwoman here representing the High Priestess. So in addition to all those feline qualities I mentioned before about McGonagall, Catwoman, or Selina Kyle, walks that fine line between light and darkness, or hero and villain. Unlike many of the other Gotham villains, Catwoman has a conscience and her own code of ethics. Not quite on the same level as Batman, but she does do some good sometimes. She is mysterious, cunning, independent, and stealthy. She is comfortable walking in the shadows. She knows the streets of Gotham very well, so the shadows can be a metaphor for the unconscious. And that allows her to get away with a lot of her crimes, which are mostly theft. She's not a murderer. I think she would only kill if it was self-defense. But she is a cat burglar, and a pretty good one at that. She's able to act as a double agent, so there's that kind of good and bad. And she gets her information from the criminals of Gotham, and she can feed that information to Batman to help him stop crimes. Okay, so before I get to this one over here, I'm going to introduce some other characters. Okay. So here we have Nimue from the Legends of King Arthur. Nimue is a lady and priestess of Avalon, so she is a priestess. She has connection to the old gods, so here we see her with fairies, and this looks like some kind of dryad or tree spirit. And she has them all around her, so she's obviously got a connection there. She is not a fairy herself, she is human. And in Welsh and Celtic mythology, fairies and gods were pretty much one and the same. So she's the aunt of King Arthur, but she walks in both the physical and the spiritual worlds. In some tales, her name is Nimue, and in others, she goes by the name Vivian. She has supernatural talents, which she obtained from her training in Avalon. She also trained under Merlin. And she's given credit for, this is just kind of a side note, for the demise of Merlin, who went mad with his obsession over her. Okay, Christina Rosales from the Shadowhunter stories is not really a high priestess, so I think this deck had accurately renamed this card to the Believer. What differentiated Christina from other Shadowhunters was the devotion to her faith. She was born and raised in Mexico, which is a very Catholic country. And even though Shadowhunters spend their daily lives fighting demons, and their history books teach that the origin and their own powers came from angels, most Shadowhunters are atheists and do not believe in a god or higher power. Christina, however, prays and wears her angel pendant as a sign of her spiritual devotion. But that's about the only quality that she shares with the High Priestess. Okay, so let's talk about Princess Zelda here, which out of all of these characters, I feel she represents the High Priestess the best. She has a connection to the goddesses Hylia and Nehru, from which she fosters her powers through ritual and devotion. It's the goddesses that give her her powers. She has psychic abilities where she can see the future. She can also communicate with telepathy, and she can teleport. The full extent of her powers are still a mystery. I think future games will show more and new abilities that she has. In this card, we see her standing alone in her tower, which she often does work out of sight. Like, we don't really see her. We just kind of know about what she's doing, that she's doing her part off-site. And here she is standing between the dark world and the light world, which are, I can't remember which game it was, but alternate versions of Hyrule and the Sacred Realm, of which she is guardian and gatekeeper. In this version, here she is holding the Ocarina of Time, which was a sacred instrument that she gives to the hero Link so that he can find his way to the Master Sword. So she's doing her work, and I like, just like Boaz and Jaqen, the dark and light pillars, here we have the light and darkness, so she stands in the center of both worlds. Okay, another character which is not in any of my decks is Galadriel from The Lord of the Rings. Even though I have a Lord of the Rings tarot deck, the character that the creators chose for the High Priestess was Éowyn, and I cannot fathom why her over Galadriel. That just baffles me. Galadriel seems like the more obvious choice, at least to me. She is a high-ranking elf with great knowledge and great power. She can also communicate telepathically and predict the future. She has her mirror, which reveals to those who look upon it the things that were, the things that are, and the things that have yet to come to pass. When Sam and Frodo looked upon her mirror, they saw what would happen if they failed to destroy the ring. She can penetrate the minds of others, including Sauron, according to the books, yet she was strong enough to shield her own mind from him, so she could read his mind, but he could not read hers. Much of her power comes from the fact that Galadriel is a ring bearer. She wears the ring Nenya, one of the 3 rings of power that was given to the elves when the rings were first created and distributed. However, it isn't the only source of her abilities, and much of her power still remains a mystery even to her fellow elves and the wizards of Middle-earth. Okay, I'm going to put these characters aside for a sec, and I'm going to do some High Priestess comparisons. So we'll put her back. Just like in the first video, when I focused on the Hierophant, both these cards symbolize religion or spirituality, where one is masculine and the other feminine. The High Priestess symbolizes the esoteric, or the mystery and secrecy of ritual and sacred knowledge that only a special few are privy to, whereas the Hierophant is the exoteric side of religion. So in other words, how it markets itself to the general public or its congregation. I heard someone say that the High Priestess is someone who knows without telling, while the Hierophant is someone who tells without knowing. So I thought that was an interesting interpretation and contrast there. Okay, so let's look at these 2 characters. So both of these 2, we have the Empress and the High Priestess, which to me both represent the divine feminine, while one is celibate and the other is pregnant. So here we have the Virgin and the Crone, which are both symbolized by a crescent moon, while the other is the Mother, which can often be symbolized with a full moon. The High Priestess is a combination of the elements water and air, so feeling, intuition, psychic ability, combined with wisdom and knowledge, whereas the Empress would be the other 2, earth and fire, for creation, creativity, and passion. Now, the High Priestess and the Magician. Again, one is masculine and one feminine. The High Priestess is withdrawal or passivity opposed to the Magician, which is all about taking action. Both work together with the divine, as this, the Magician, he's got one hand pointed to heaven and the other to earth, and she wears the cross, spiritual world and the physical world. This one receives divine messages and communicates that info to the physical world, whereas the Magician is co-creating with spirit and taking action in the physical world. Now I thought I would compare these 2 cards because of this very similar meaning and symbolism. The moon, both these cards, because of the moon symbol, both these cards represent psychic energy, the unconscious or subconscious coming into light. The difference is that the High Priestess focuses on what is to come, being open to possibilities, understanding potential, and developing those ideas, and being open to options and possibilities. Whereas the moon, on the other hand, is more of the shadow archetype, or understanding what was or how things came to be, going deep in the subconscious to uncover where and when your inner demons and triggers were born and what caused them so that you can begin to heal from them. Now, another card that has a similar meaning to the High Priestess is the Hermit, because both these cards indicate solitude, seclusion, seeking answers within, and self-reliance. The difference is that the High Priestess isn't just about being alone and private, but being alone with spirit and being receptive to information from a higher source or the collective unconscious. In other words, inspiration. She is open to inspiration or receiving inspiration, and that word inspiration means being in spirit. The Hermit, on the other hand, is about being alone with oneself, so connecting to your personal unconscious and finding answers within. And lastly, I struggled with this for a while because I felt like, again, here's two cards with two very similar meanings, both speaking of withdrawal, non-activity, or taking pause. And after sitting with these cards and meditating on them a bit, I realized that the High Priestess is not just about not being involved, but taking the time to process information, to meditate, to pray, or to receive messages or new information, particularly from spirit. Whereas the Hangman is about detachment and letting go and release, giving up control, renouncing something, or walking away from something. So with the High Priestess, there's still that element of being involved and attached in a healthy way, whereas the Hangman is sort of detaching, releasing, letting go. So that's the difference between those two cards. Alrighty. So just to recap, the qualities here, so we see a lot of similar qualities in many of these characters. The High Priestess is an archetype who works in secret. She's mysterious and very private. Much of her duties take place behind the scenes, as many of these characters do in their respective stories. She's not seen as having a very active role, but a spiritual one. Her ritual and practices are not for just anyone, but for a select few. She has access to sacred knowledge and imbues her wisdom to those who consult her. She has psychic and supernatural powers. She has a strong connection to the divine and is devoted to her faith. She sits in the center between the darkness and light and acts as a gatekeeper to the collective unconscious. She is comfortable in the shadows, for the shadow self is still the self. And that pretty much wraps up my thoughts and observations on the High Priestess. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified as soon as the next episode is posted. I invite you to share your thoughts or observations or anything that you think I may have missed. If you know of any other famous fictional High Priestesses from your favorite TV shows, movies, games, or books, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay shiny and keep sparkling.